Okay, it is Wednesday, March 6, 2019. It is 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And welcome to the final lecture for Introduction to Corrections, Week 10. And I'm going to pass on information to you concerning assignments, things that are due for this week, as well as I'm going to mention at the end week 11. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by sharing my screen. The information details here, you know. Remind you that your rubric is in each assignment. Your recordings are here. And tonight I will record week 9 and then send you a copy of that. So let's go right to the announcement. So this week we're going to deal with juvenile offenders. And you were to read section 13 of the text, of which I sent you the corresponding PowerPoints for your study. And we're going to discuss the juvenile justice system, historical perspective, major cases, and juvenile corrections vocabulary that comes about. Your discussion assignment, the role of juvenile probation officer or PO, is due last night, March 5th at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and your reply posts are due this Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And finally, you have two other things which are due Sunday, and those two items are your state's waiver process, a document that I will mention and cover in a few minutes, and make sure you satisfy the requirements, and make sure you run your papers through Grammarly. It is very, very, very important so that you don't get a high percentage of Grammarly for plagiarism. I've looked at some papers and I've seen that already, and since week 10 assignments are not due until Sunday, there is a chance for you, if you've already submitted the assignment, to go back and change that and correct that and submit a second one. Okay? And then the quiz, which both are due by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Let's take a look at your course calendar. Okay, so we got to take one out of there. J280 is in there too. Okay, here we go. Come back to it. There we go. So this is where we are right here. As you can see, this is the final lecture. Your initial post was due last night, the 5th. Your reply post is due this Saturday, the 9th. And then your written assignment, your quiz and written assignment are due this Sunday by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then, looking at your calendar for next week, you got your reading assignment, your initial post. Notice that your reply post, written assignment, and final exam are all due on the 15th because the quarter officially ends at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time on the 15th. In other words, no assignments will be accepted after that. Okay? So let's go right to the module for 10. Again, let's go over the assignment with the rubric. Your state's waiver. It's a 2-page paper, and you satisfy the requirements of that is written. And, well, as your rubric, and it tells you what you're supposed to do for 15 points. And then we get into the content the grammar to get 25 points. But make sure you run your papers through Grammarly and provide citations in the body and references at the end, as you should be aware by now. Okay? The other thing that for week 10 is your discussion post, which I've already discussed, and then, of course, your timed quiz. All right? So now let's get into a discussion of the chapter for the week. Let's go over the lesson content. Of course, the topic is about juvenile justice. And I'm going to talk about the juvenile justice system and the perspective, historical, some major cases, make a few comments about them, juvenile correction vocabulary as well. Again, you should be familiar with this from your readings. So let's look at the juvenile justice system. You should recognize, first of all, that the juvenile justice system has a different goal than the adult court system, and that the theory that operates in the juvenile justice system originates from England when the king stepped in when a kid, a minor, committed an offense, and it operates on the basis of a Latin term, parens patriae, which means that the system steps in as the parent to correct the child, and so provide them with new direction in life. Today, the juvenile courts operate the same way. That is why, number one, they're closed. They're not open to the public. The identity of the juvenile is protected quite frequently. You will not see people of the state of Illinois versus John Doe. You'll see in re John Doe and the name of the person, because a juvenile system, while it is almost the same process, it has a different goal. It begins with a petition, not an indictment, not a summons. And juveniles are not arrested, but they're taken into custody. Now, what that really means is that they're not free to go, and then the Miranda rights kick in when they are taken into custody. But the term arrest is not used. Detain and not jail. This is a terminology. But the reason for the terminology difference is because of the goal. You think about arrest and jail, that means you're in trouble and we're going to probably punish you somewhat. Adjudicated, which means you're not found guilty, but you're adjudicated, which has the effect. The same standard of beyond a reasonable doubt applies to juvenile courts as it does to adult courts. You're given a disposition, which we call a sentence in the adult court. So the idea is that you are taken away until you turn an adult, so that they can try to salvage you, so that when you do become an adult, you don't move into the adult correction center, and then you fall into the processes of those steps. So, and probation is ordered for the period that the juvenile is under the system. Now, same way as adult offenders, there's an investigation and report, which we call a pre-sentence investigation, which in this case really could be the predisposition. But anyway, the point of the matter is that it is ordered to determine the disposition of the juvenile. And juveniles are classified based on the risk needs to try to help those young people to determine what services and programs that would cause them to change their directions. That could be anything from boot camps, that could be a variety of things. Now, juveniles report to probation officers However, the probation officer works closely with the family. With the adults, it works primarily with the individual. And the family might be their support, but in the juvenile probation department, the juvenile probation officer works with the family to try to help this child, or to help the parents to parent, or whoever the guardian is. So they can be placed in out of the home for a number of reasons. Sometimes they're placed in group homes, wilderness programs, where they're out taking like camp to get them out, to get them away from the urban areas, and then boot camps, which is like going to military, where these are some usually pretty tough people that they're sent away for a period of time to see if they can get their minds back focused. And then there's some that end up in what we call detention centers, or they're more secure. They're like prisons or jails, depending on the amount of time that the person is sentenced for, whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor. But the idea is to help the young person to get an education and provide services. Of course, if there's a drug problem, you got the same issues that you have for adults. They have the need for the programs to help them to get off of those drugs. And those are the features. And then, of course, when the juvenile commits a crime that's considered heinous, then they can be waived to adult court. And your assignment for this week is to provide the waiver system that you have. Every jurisdiction has some system that the juvenile justice system has, or that the juvenile goes through before they are tried as an adult. And but remember, it's usually a serious offense, okay? And it can be some very serious adult sanctions. The issues of youth and adult prisons, though, create problems for juveniles if they end up going there, such as dealing with the overcrowding, the violence. They're exploited by adult offenders. And so they can, many jurisdictions continue to research and work in the area to try to deal with some kind of treatment that keeps them out of that situation. But it can go into house arrest or even into electronic monitoring. So, as I told you, the judge is the one who deals with the case. And we're going to talk about whether it writes to juries and all those other things in just a few minutes. So remember, the goal is to help that youth to change their direction. That should be the same for adults, but that is the primary role. In other words, the juvenile judge steps in as an assistant to the parent of the youth. That's the difference in the adult and the juvenile system. So let's look at the cases that apply, major cases that have happened to deal with juvenile rights that have come about over time, starting from 1966 to some major cases between that time. So the first one is Kent versus United States, which said that due process rights are guaranteed to juveniles before they are transferred to adult courts. In other words, they have a hearing, they have a right to confront the witnesses, they have a right to determine what information they can present to say that they should not be transferred to the adult system, but should remain in the juvenile system. And that Kent versus United States stands for that proposition. In 1967, in Ray-Galt, it was determined in hearings that result in commitment to institutions that the constitutional rights that many adults have, such as the right to timely notification of the charges, this is heading into due process, the right to confront witnesses, the right to self-incrimination. In other words, they didn't have to testify. They had the Fifth Amendment right of the Constitution on their side. And then, of course, the Sixth Amendment right to counsel as well. So that is the key thing, is to provide many of the devices to protect the juvenile that were provided in the adult. And that's what N. Ray Galt stood for. Then in 1970, a landmark case, N. Ray Winship, the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, as I said earlier, which is the same as in criminal court. So it is the same standard in criminal court that the judge must find the juvenile delinquent beyond a reasonable doubt. 71, jury trials was determined are not constitutionally required. And the reason I told you is because of what I said earlier, is that the judge acts for the benefit of that juvenile. So if they're going to be tried in juvenile courts, there is no right to a jury trial even right now, since the decision in McKeever, which is still good law as of right now. Reed versus Jones says the waiver to a criminal court following an adjudication in juvenile court is double jeopardy. So if you're tried in juvenile court, then the state can't try you next in adult court. It's either one or the other. It would constitute double jeopardy. And so Reed versus Jones brought the concept of the constitutional right to double jeopardy in the juvenile court. Smith versus Daily Publishing Company says that the press, remember I told you how closed and protective, but look at how it limits the press. The press can report juvenile proceedings in certain circumstances. But remember what the key thing is that the identity of the youth is protected at all costs. And that's one of the key factors. The public needs to know about offenses. However, they need to protect the privacy of that juvenile while they're going through the juvenile justice system. Eddings versus Oklahoma, a 1982 case, says that, and this is going to be changed, but it said in 82 that the youthful age should be considered a mitigating factor to determine whether or not the death penalty is applied to juveniles. But that has changed. This is historical, but I'm going to leave you in 2005 with what the law is now concerning the death penalty and juveniles. So let's go to 84. In Shaw versus Martin, preventive trial detention of juveniles is allowed. In other words, juveniles are allowed to be held, no bail in those situations under circumstances. Remember, the Constitution doesn't guarantee bail, but it guarantees that bail should be reasonable, and that the purpose for bail is to determine whether or not that individual appears, and if the offense is not a very serious offense, should be a low or reasonable bail. So then we come to 88, Thompson versus Oklahoma. And so the minimum age of death penalty was set at 16. So remember before, it was that you consider the tender age before you gave the death penalty. Well, Thompson versus Oklahoma said the minimum was set by the United States Supreme Court at 16. And then finally, the determination in Roper versus Simmons is that the minimum age for the death penalty is set at 18. So you can't execute a minor, 17 and under. If an individual commits an offense at the time they were 17, they can get life, but they cannot get the death penalty. And so the reason is, again, we want to try to protect juveniles. And that's pretty much the way that the major cases in the juvenile justice system. So now we close with dealing with Parents Patriae, which I explained to you, a Latin term describing the concept where English kings established the right to intervene in the lives of children. And again, they stepped in as parents. That's what that meant. Let's go back. Status offender, a juvenile who engages in behavior that is illegal because of their age. Okay. Next. Community treatment. Effort to provide care, protection, service, and treatment to juveniles, such as probation, counseling, and restitution. That was one of the things I talked about earlier. Institutional treatment. Facilities operated by the state or county to restrict the movement of the residents through staff monitoring, locked exits, so forth. This is where your really serious offenders in juvenile are incarcerated. Kind of like the maximum security in adults. Non-residential is, of course, when the offender is not confined overnight. Basically allowed to stay home, maybe under house arrest or electric monitoring or something like that as a sentence. Aftercare, the equivalency of parole. So that's what comes after the individual is released from the juvenile detention center to finish the rest of their sentence outside of the detention center. Judicial waiver, we've already talked about that. Intake personnel, prosecutors or judges who make a decision to transfer the juvenile to adult court. And again, remember I said each state has differences. Social investigation report, which is equivalent to the pre-sentence investigation, which gives about the background of the juvenile to help the judge in terms of an appropriate disposition for the juvenile. Statutory exclusion in certain laws in some states that automatically transfer offenders to adult courts for certain offenses. And that's the end of that. Okay? So that's it for week 10. Now let's go to week 11 before we adjourn. And let's go over the assignments for next week. Okay. Technology in your correction system. And of course, that's due, as I said, the 15th. And it tells you to conduct internet research. And then in a 1 to 2 page paper with citations and references as you already are familiar with. Okay, remember, it's due Friday, the 15th. This is week 11 I'm talking about now. The initial posts are due Tuesday and Friday for the reply post. And then your final exam. 40 multiple choice, true and false questions. It's a 40-minute exam. You'll have one opportunity to do this. Once you start it, you're going to have to keep going. Now, this is going to consist of the materials for the last 11 weeks. That is why I encouraged you for week 1 to make sure that you take a look at the best thing that can help you is to look at your PowerPoints that you did and remember what you did in your assignments. And that's going to be due by next Friday, the 15th, a week from this Friday. And that's it. Now, I want to say that I hope each of you have understood in terms of, many of you struggled with the course project, some because of the fact that some of you decided not to do it on jail, probation, parole, or prison. But most of you who ran into problems because of the delays that you ran into. I said at the very beginning of this course that you're going to run into that, and I suggested that you get on that right away. There have been students who have told me that they were set for appointments and then they fell through. Only thing I can tell you is when you do these assignments, particularly that project, always double check, confirm and reconfirm with it. And I do understand that when your interviews fall through. However, I don't understand when you could not do week 2 rather, selecting the agency and the assignment, week 4, doing the research for, and then week 9 is the final after you got it. So the problem that a lot of people run into is the interview. I don't mind, I'm real flexible when it comes to points for that. So your final project is due now already, week 9. I'm in the process of grading them this week, and I'll be through grading them by Friday. So I hope that you've learned a lot in this course toward corrections. I do invite you to continue with your education. If you're getting an associate's, to go to your bachelor's. I have some students that I end up getting in the course as they're about to leave J115, which is Contemporary Issues in Criminal Justice, and some of you may be in that class already for the spring, where I'll be teaching that. And that's a survey course. That is almost like an independent studies. But in this course, hope that you gain a thorough knowledge of the corrections system and how it applies and fits within the criminal justice program. And also you understand whether you're going to be a correction officer or not, you still need to understand how it works. So you can understand how you deal with your clients, whether you're a lawyer, if you're a police officer, if you're a probation officer, parole officer, all of those requirements. And you also learn, too, that in order to be a probation officer and parole officer, there may be some age issues, but there also, more importantly, is education requirements of a minimum of a bachelor's degree. So all those things should come together. If you need to reach out to me, even after this course, feel free to. If you need a referral, you can reach out to me. I have continued to help students after the course is over. And again, many of you do become students in my other classes. So with that, I'm going to say good night to you. And you know what to do if you have any further questions and how to reach out to me. So good night.